Because, yes, good morning, everybody. Welcome in our animal welfare intergroup. You might know that, of course, I was disappointed about the state of the union, of course. Animal welfare not mentioned, the revision that is ready of the animal welfare legislation was not even mentioned, and we know that it's of course linked to agriculture, linked to the Green Deal that was mentioned, but without really a lot of explanations. Well, in my eyes, it was really a presentation made by the President of the Commission, mainly turning around trade and industry. I don't know how often the term competitiveness was mentioned, but nothing on animal welfare, and that was for me, of course, very, very disappointing. So that's why it's very important, and I'm happy to see quite some people here in the room and also connected. The fight must go on more than ever, that we have this revision of the animal welfare legislation, and for better animal welfare, I would even say also animal rights. So this morning we are going to speak about broiler chickens across the EU, where we will discuss also the impact of the genetic makeup for broiler chickens on their welfare. The science is clear. Fast-growing broiler chickens lead painful, miserable lives. The citizens are clear they won't change. Corporate stakeholders are clear they can make this change happen at market level, and they show their willingness to do so by signing up to the European chicken commitment. The only missing puzzle piece is the European Commission making this change also happen. We count on them to include a ban of fast-growing breeds in the upcoming revised animal welfare legislation. Another remark I want to make in the introduction is that we have an oral question in support of the European Citizens' Initiative for Free Europe. In October, the Agri, IMCO and PETI committees will organize a hearing on the successful ECI for Free Europe. It is, however, not yet clear if the committees involved will also prepare a motion for resolution. For this reason, it will be upheld to table an oral question on the ECI for Free Europe, which could lead to a plenary debate and a linked motion for resolution. So I, Secretariat, circulated the proposed oral question, so please be reminded to include your name should you wish to support this initiative. Also, as you know, we had an open letter from the Animal Welfare Intergroup to the European Commission on the presentation of the 4 planned animal welfare revision proposal. Did not help, but we put pressure as much as we could by campaigning by this letter. I also wanted to remind you that the members of the Intergroup sent last week to the European Commission supporting a timely publication of the proposed animal welfare legislation. There has also been another letter signed by over 600 signatures, including scientists, veterinarians, corporate stakeholders and professional organizations, asking for the same thing. So the pressure was really coming from different sides, that the Commission should do their job and keep the promise made to the EU citizens. An ambitious updated legislation is also crucial to improve the very miserable lives of broiler chickens. That is the topic that we are going to address today. But I wanted very shortly give the floor also to Thomas Weiss and to Francisco, if he...
To Mrs. Bonfrisco.
Pardon. To Mrs. Bonfrisco, then ladies first, and then to Thomas Weiss to say something about the situation of les taureaux. I don't find the word.
Thank you, Chair. Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam. And thank you, colleagues. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you a little bit about a call that we're making. Many of you will have seen the awful images coming from close to Valencia in Spain of a bull that was attacked and then set up on fire. This is a really cruel and ignoble way of treating animals. It's an offence to the notion of European civilized life. So there were 25,000 different activities in Spain. So I'd like to call on you to ask for the European Commission to intervene, or for the European Parliament to engage with the Spanish government and civil society so as to put an end to these practices. Citizens have already taken action. There have already been 35,000 signatures against these traditions, which is how they're described. We would call them something else. I do apologise for taking the floor on a day that we're focusing on something more important, but it did seem to me that it was worth highlighting. Thank you.
Yes, it was very worth highlighting, and I would like to thank you for this input. And I'm wondering when we are going to stop with this barbaric and stupid traditions, or how should I call it? Yeah. So thank you very much for this input, and and we were going to discuss what we're going to do really on this specific topic. Oui.
Je vous remercie justement d'intervenir sur ce sujet.
I wanted to comment on this issue. This is a tradition which has existed for a very long time, and I've been working on petitions against it for a very long time. So I think it would be very good if the European Parliament's Intergroup could actually take action and engage with Spain. We need to take action to put an end to these activities which shouldn't exist.
Merci beaucoup. Then I also give the floor to Thomas Weitz, because he spent good 2 weeks in Brazil, and just to have some related input to the situation of animal welfare, or in general the situation there in Brazil. Short input, yeah. Please, Thomas Weitz of Brazil.
Thanks, Tilly. I just want to share 2-3 insights with you. It was a long journey, and we investigated all kinds of things related to the EU-Mercosur trade agreement, but also Deforestation Act and due diligence. On the negative side, clearly, there is no traceability of cattle in Brazil. We even pay, as a European Union, some organizations that try to cover that up, but it's the fact is that there is no individual tagging in Brazil, so only 2% of the animals have an individual tag. So everything that is registered is the streams of amounts, but you can never say which cow came from where and which cow is related to deforestation or which cow was transported. Second negative insight is that live exports towards Middle East and North Africa are substantially increasing. Other live transports that do not come anymore from, as an example, from Australia, are replaced by live transports from Brazil. And this is like 3 weeks on the ship minimum, which is quite heavy. But then also one thing I wanted to share with you, just that you know, if we talk about animal transport, we shouldn't point our finger on Brazil because they have a maximum of 8 hours transport time. So they are much more progressive than we are. So just that you know that you don't fall in the trap when it comes to transport. Their regulations are better than ours.
But on the other, thank you very much, first of all, for this information. I think it's important to know that we speak about the need of traceability, etc., and then you saw on the ground that it is not possible at all, and that it is not done at their level. But they don't have a ban yet, or is that a discussion in Brazil, the ban of live animal export? No, that is not in discussion. They have inside the country the 8 hours limits, but not... Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for this input. And now we go to the agenda really that was foreseen today, because we have 2 fantastic speakers joining us. Anja Brinch Riber, she's Senior Researcher, Department of Animal and Veterinary Sciences and of the Aarhus University. And we have Mia Bonnichsen, I don't know if I pronounce it well, Bonnichsen, Food and Agricultural Policy Consultant Veterinarian of the Animal Protection Denmark. So we will first listen to the presentation on the scientific basic for higher welfare broiler hybrids and phasing out fast growing broilers in Denmark and in the EU. And then, of course, as always, we will open the floor for questions and answers. As always, it is streamed on Axio, and it will be recorded, our meeting, and voila, and all the presentation will, of course, be uploaded in our Intergroup website afterwards. So I will now give the floor to Anja Riber for a good 10 minutes, who will present the scientific basic for higher welfare broiler hybrids. Mrs. Riber, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, first I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to give this talk, and to the members of the Parliament for being here listening to it. I'm a senior researcher in poultry behavior and welfare at Aarhus University in Denmark, and I've been invited as such to present the available scientific evidence for broiler hybrids demonstrating higher welfare today. Is that better? Okay. During my talk, I will give first a brief introduction to the origin of the broiler and to the genetic selection for faster growth, which has occurred during many of the past decades. Then I'll go through the scientific evidence. Of how slower growth rates improve broiler and broiler breeder welfare. I will briefly show you the availability of broiler hybrids with different growth rates before summing up according to concerns for animal welfare and giving you the conclusions. The broiler and the laying hen both have the jungle fowl as the ancestor, but where the laying hen has been selected for high egg production, the broiler has been selected for high meat production, including fast growth and high feed efficiency. The striking fact about this already rather old photo is that all the chicks here are 11 days old, and yet they still show remarkable size differences. The accomplishment of the genetic selection for faster growth is very clear in this illustration here, showing representative commercial broiler hybrids from year 1957, 1978, and 2005. Where the chickens were 0, 28, and 56 days old. And if we calculate the growth rate, which is the average daily weight, daily gain in body weight measured in grams, the growth rate has increased by astonishing 376% during these 5 decades. Since then, the selection has been more relaxed, such that a representative fast-growing hybrid in year 2002 now weighs 4,300 grams at 56 days of age, corresponding to a growth rate of 67 grams per day. Most of the broilers production around the world is currently based on fast-growing broilers with a growth rate above 60 grams per day. So this doesn't come without negative consequences for animal welfare. The faster the growth, the poorer the animal welfare. Thus, if concerned about animal welfare, a solution is to use broiler hybrids with slower growth rates, as they show improved welfare. And in the following slides, I will walk you through the scientific evidence on this. Broilers with slower growth show improved walking ability, and this has been repeatedly demonstrated in research studies, both within hybrids, between hybrids housed under the same conditions, and between hybrids housed in different production systems or settings. An example of this comes from Dixon and colleagues, who compared the walking ability of a slower growing hybrid with that of 3 fast growing hybrids, using the Bristol scale, which range from 0, which is sound gait, to 5, where the animal is not able to walk. A gait score of 2 is known to reduce the occurrence of behaviors considered positive, and a gait score of 3 is where the bird is visible lame on one leg. So the lower on the scale, the better the welfare. And as you can see here, the proportion of birds with a gait score 0 and 1 is much higher than for the slower growing hybrid than for the fast growing, whereas the gait scores 2 and 3 are higher for the fast growing hybrids. Broilers with slower growth rates also show better leg health, which improves walking ability and likely reduces potential associated pain, frustration, and fear. This has been shown for a number of leg disorders, some of which I've listed here. Contact dermatitis is a common welfare issue in broilers. It's an inflammation of the tissue of the skin of the feet, hocks and breast, leading to necrosis and ulcerations. So on these photos, the broilers are not dirty, but they are suffering from contact dermatitis. As already mentioned, with slower growth, broilers with slower growth have improved mobility, which means that they are more likely to spend less time sitting with hocks and breast in contact with the litter, which means they also have a higher foraging activity, which results in a higher turnover of the litter and are likely to slow the deterioration of the litter. And both of these factors reduce the risk of developing contact dermatitis, and indeed a lower prevalence of contact dermatitis is shown in slower growing broilers in multiple studies. Next. Broilers with slower growth have fewer changes in the ratio of muscles to organs caused by genetic selection. So in the fast-growing broilers, we see proportionately smaller hearts and lungs. And this means that the slower-growing broilers have a reduced risk of cardiac rhythm disturbances, which means a reduced risk of sudden death syndrome, where the bird suddenly flips over and dies due to heart failure. But also a reduced risk of ascites, which, among other things, is characterized by a dilatation of the heart, changes in the liver function, pulmonary insufficiency, and accumulation of large amounts of fluid in the abdominal cavity. Ascites develops gradually, meaning that the bird suffers for an extended period before they die. But broilers with slower growth also have reduced risk of mortality, including fewer birds found dead and fewer being culled. One example of this comes from a study by Bonnichsen and colleagues who compared two slower-growing hybrids with a fast-growing hybrid over 2 batches and found a significant lower mortality rate in the slower-growing hybrid compared to the fast-growing hybrid after week 3 of age until the end of the rearing period. Yes. Broilers with slower growth have a lower heat production due to their lower metabolism, which reduces the risk of heat stress and mortality from high temperatures. Slower growing broilers also have a reduced risk of breast muscle myopathies and are therefore likely to experience less muscle weakness and less long-lasting discomfort. This is a disease of the breast muscle, which comes in different varieties, and it has been known for decades that fast growth is a risk factor for this disease. But despite of this, there is limited research into the topic regarding the welfare implications for the birds. Broilers with slower growth have a different time budget, with a higher proportion being used on active behavior, which promotes leg health. In general, they spend more time on highly motivated behaviors such as foraging, perching, and play behavior at the expense of sitting, so being inactive, and feeding and drinking. There are also studies showing that they are less fearful, which may be linked to their better mobility, meaning that they can withdraw from something frightening, which is also positive for the animal welfare. The figure here shows the percentage of time a slower growing hybrid spends on perching in comparison with a fast growing hybrid as they become progressively older. And as you can see, they both decrease in time spent perching towards the end of the rearing period, but the slower broiler spent more time overall on this highly motivated behavior. So the slower growing broilers make use of elevated structures, or better use of it, but also better use of the outdoor range area in terms of the number of birds being outside at all ages, and also how far they range on the outdoor area and how early they access it. when first giving the opportunity. Yes. The broiler breeders are the parent stock of the broilers and are often forgotten in the discussions of animal welfare. But slower growth also affects the welfare of breeders positively. So the challenge with the breeders is that the selection for faster growth has changed the hunger regulation mechanisms, which has led to an increased appetite. So these birds are more or less constantly hungry. Feed restriction is therefore applied to avoid obese broiler breeders to keep them healthy and reproductive, but this practice also results in a number of negative welfare issues such as frustration, stress, aggression, stereotypies, and behavioral changes indicative of poor animal welfare. Broiler breeders with slower growth potential, so those producing the slower growing broilers, are subjected to less, if any, feed restriction and show improved welfare. The graph here shows an example of the growth curves of a fast-growing hybrid fed ad libitum, so the red graph with the closed circles, and the same fast-growing hybrid shown fed restricted, shown as the red graph with the open circles, and a slower growing hybrid, which is the green blue graph. And as you can see, the slower growing hybrid, they keep the body weight. So it doesn't, it keeps the body weight at a level that doesn't compromise the health and the reproduction, while simultaneously the bird is experiencing better animal welfare because it's not experiencing hunger. Next. You may be speculating what the definition of a slower growing hybrid is, but there is no consensus on this. However, the research studies providing the scientific evidence that I've shown here are generally using hybrids growing less than 50 grams per day, and as the slower growing hybrid, but some of the studies are comparing hybrids where all of them are below the 50 grams per day. And there is a wealth of broiler hybrids already available on the market with a wide range of growth rates. And the growth curves of some of them are shown here on the figure with a fast-growing hybrid as the reference, the one in red. And just to clarify, broilers are not machines, they are living animals. So meaning that they have a growth rate, or the growth rate of a specific hybrid is not only determined by genetics, but also how we house them and how we feed them, so there is some flexibility. So when ethologists like me are assessing animal welfare, we base the assessment of a number of carefully selected welfare indicators, and these indicators have to be represent different and relevant aspects of animal welfare. And one framework to use is the one suggested by Fraser, who grouped concerns for animal welfare under 3 headings, so basic health and functioning, natural living, and affective states. And then when summing up the existing scientific evidence of how different welfare indicators are affected by slowing the growth rate in broilers, we find multiple welfare indicators under all 3 headings that all show improvements of animal welfare when the growth rate of the broilers is reduced. So coming to the conclusions, there is overwhelming scientific evidence that returning to a more normal state by slowing the growth rate of a broiler has a positive influence on the welfare of both broilers and broiler breeders. Growth rate affects multiple welfare indicators within all concerns of animal welfare, including basic health and functioning, natural behavior, and affective states. And for comparison, I would say few, if any, single changes in environmental aspects have as profound an impact on that many different welfare indicators. And generally, the slower the growth rate, the better the welfare. And since I assume that you will ask for a threshold value, I will mention that EFSA recommends a growth rate less than 50 grams per day. And slower growing hybrids differing in growth rates are already available on the market. Lastly, I would like to point out that my talk focused on growth rate, but genetic selection also affects other aspects which may result in welfare improvements. For example, temperament, hybrid-specific growth curves, or differences in body weight, or body conformation, but research on this is sparse. So I would end this talk by acknowledging my colleague, Caitlin Woods, for her assistance with the preparations of this talk, which is based on a review on the topic that we are currently preparing. And I would be happy to take any questions. But not now, apparently.
Exactly. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Thank you. And also very clear on the content, I must say. Then I give immediately the floor to Mia Bonnichsen, who will present on phasing out fast-growing broilers in Denmark and the EU. There you are. Good morning, Mia Bonnichsen, and you have the floor. Good morning. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Well, my name is Mia Bonnichsen. I'm a veterinarian and a master in animal welfare assessment in animal livestock production. I work as an animal welfare consultant in Animal Protection Denmark. In my organization, we work for better welfare for all animals, from the wild animals in the nature to the egg-laying hens kept in cages. The welfare of broilers is a very high priority for us, and we're very concerned about the many animal welfare problems in this massive industry. Painful leg disorders, heart problems, and hungry broiler breeders are welfare problems that are directly related to the high growth rate of the broilers. Yes. Well, you probably already know this text, because this is the wording of the current legislation regarding the genotype and the breeding of the farmed animals. But unfortunately, the good intention in this wording has not protected the animals from the consequences of the selective breeding for high production. And the broilers are an obvious example of this. Because now the broilers are growing from a day-old chicken of 40 grams to 2 kilograms in just 35 days when they're ready for slaughter. As the scientist Anja Brinch Riber just talked about in the former presentation, the scientific evidence about the welfare problems of the high growth rate of the broilers is very clear. So the conclusion to this must be that the legislation is clearly not enforced at the moment. It's very important that the update of the legislation must also solve the obvious problems with enforcement. Next, please. I might as well just mention the climate crisis, because it's the agenda that we all have to deal with at the moment. Our food consumption and production need to change in a more climate-friendly direction. But the animals must not be the losers here. We cannot continue to push them to produce more for less. The welfare problems of fast-growing broilers is an international problem. There's only a few breeding companies worldwide, and the large amount of trade and export of broilers means that a solution in the EU is needed. And of course, the rules should also apply to imports. The obvious conflict of interest in solving these issues between the economy and the animal welfare means that the industry will probably not be able to solve these issues on their own. So therefore, legislation on breed in EU is crucial. And the upcoming animal welfare legislation must be improved, and it must be more precise to ensure enforcement. A limit on the growth rate is absolutely necessary, and it will have an enormous impact on the growth rate and on the animal welfare. Unfortunately, broiler production can be done differently without the fast-growing broilers. There are alternatives to this. I was asked to talk about the Danish agreement and the European chicken commitment as example of these alternatives. Next, please. So just before summer this year, a majority of the Danish political parties, they made an agreement of how to improve the animal welfare in broilers. And this statement is from the agreement. It's very important now that the politicians agree and acknowledge the fact that there are animal welfare issues with the production of the fast-growing broilers. The purpose of the agreement is to reduce the production of the fast-growing broilers, and this will be achieved by different actions to shift the demand towards the slower growing ones. And as a new thing in the debate, it also mentions the broiler breeders. It's very important to remember all the animals in production chain, including in this case the broiler breeders. And why is it so important with these? Well, as Anja also mentioned, to ensure the productivity and health, the breeders, they cannot be allowed to grow as fast as they're meant to. So to make them grow slower, they're fed a very restricted diet, and meaning that the poor animals are left in a state of prolonged hunger. Next, please. Phasing out the governmental procurement of fast-growing broilers is one of the means in the agreement, in the Danish agreement, to move the demand away from the fast-growing broilers. And doing this is a great signal value in what's acceptable in our society. In Denmark, a similar agreement has already been made for the cage eggs. They're phased out from part of the public procurement already next year. It's also an initiative that gives a direct outlet for the slow-growing chickens and thereby supporting the alternative production. The timing of this is so important because it will be expected that more poultry and less beef will be bought in the Danish public sector in the future, of course due to the climate considerations. So it's therefore very, very important that beef is not replaced by many, many individuals with poor animal welfare. We are of course very excited that the agreement includes that Denmark will work for phase out the fast-growing broilers at the EU level as well. So when the Commission hopefully presents the new rules of animal welfare, Denmark could seek the support of other member states to phase out the fast-growing broilers all over the EU. And we are very happy that Denmark is now committed to taking the lead in this process. Phasing out the fast-growing broilers could be seen as a natural follow-up of the position paper from the so-called Frugt Alliance back in 2020 with other countries. And hopefully, more countries are willing to support the suggestion and make an actual difference for the animals. We consider this agreement in Denmark as a very important first step towards an animal welfare legislation that also includes the breeding. Next, please. Well, my organization, Animal Protection Denmark, is also a signature of the European Chicken Commitment. As one of the 37 organizations joined in a common agreement on how the baseline broiler welfare should be. The criteria of a European Chicken Commitment are on top of the EU laws, because the current legislation is not sufficient enough to ensure an acceptable animal welfare level. Most importantly in this context today is that only breeds that demonstrate higher welfare outcomes are allowed in the ECC. But the ECC also sets standards to the environment, like purchase and stocking density, and about the stunning procedure at slaughter. The European Chicken Commitment shows that in practice it is possible under production conditions to significantly improve animal welfare and make it with specific demands to the breeds as well as to the animal's environment. And amazingly, more than 500 companies worldwide have committed to this European Chicken Commitment. But this should not only apply to the animals that happen to be bred under voluntary initiatives. Now that the European Chicken Commitment and many other initiatives have shown the way, it really is time for the upcoming legislation to ensure better conditions for all the broilers in the EU. Next, please. So that was it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much to you. And I will immediately open the floor for questions. And I have already 2 persons that like to ask a question, 3 persons now. I have, first of all, Anja, Annika, and then the lady with the black and white. Sorry that I don't know you. Anja, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for your presentations. I have a question for Mia. You spoke about the Danish example, and in the first part, the initiative of the politicians, I heard a lot of times the word demand, shift the demand to slow-growing breeds. And I was wondering if in this action plan, or if there is also attention for the production side, or is it just trying to shift the demand from fast-growing breeds to slow-growing breeds, or and influencing the European legislation, or do you influence the producer side as well?
I think we take some few questions and then we come back to you, if that's okay, to the experts here in the room, if that's okay for you, Mia. Yes, then I have Annika, please.
Merci, merci beaucoup Tilly, merci.
Thank you, Tilly. Thank you for your presentation. 12th of July, I sent a question to the Commission on this issue, reminding them that it was intensive, the growth that brought about these genetic changes, and that there was also something that has an impact on the health. If you have rapid growth, you create double the stress of ordinary poultry. And I mentioned that because I wanted them to have a look at my question and encourage holdings which do not have recourse to the system, where that they have hens that suffer less of such problems. My assistant has brought me the question of the European Commission, and it says that it asked the authority on animal safety to give an opinion. The authority says that maximum growth rate of 50 grams a day. So it was the lower range that has been accepted. So it would appear that a commission would be willing to limit abuse in this area, although we had expected more. So we have to pursue our action. And you spoke about the cycle and circulation of information with regard to putting aside this issue for the time being.
Two other questions from the members, if that is okay, and then I come back to the other peoples in the room. I thank you for the understanding of that. I have Niels and then Petras.
Thank you, Tilly. Thank you to the presenters. I would like to ask you, I absolutely agree that we should have this legislation in the EU putting some limits to the fast-growing broilers. I would like to ask you about some of the counter-arguments one might meet. The first one is the economic one. Which kind of economic consequences do you think it would have for the farmers if we had these limits? Would it be serious economic consequences, or do you think it would be manageable for the farmers? And also, when it comes to climate, I mean, some of these farmers or people who support fast-growing broilers, I think I've heard that they say it's better for climate because it's more efficient to have an agriculture like this. What do you think is the counter-response to this? And then I have a question specifically to Mia Bonnichsen, who started the presentation by showing a paragraph from the current legislation and stated that it's not probably enforced and that we need to address enforcement and implementation in the upcoming revision. Do you have any particular areas where you think we need to focus here when we talk about enforcement? Thank you.
And then Petras, please, and then we close this round.
Thank you, and thank you indeed for great presentations and very informative presentations you just gave to us. I mean, the Danish example, if Denmark succeeds in going from fast to normal or slow-growing production of broilers, will be indeed a very inviting example for other member states. You have any information, I mean, how many might follow or are interested, I mean, to take the Danish example on to introduce similar legislation at home? And since the boilers production is massive, I just checked the statistics, it's over 7 billion a year, 7 billion a year. And indeed, as Niels rightly said, it has an economic component or factor. And if to enter into discussion with producers, if you compare slow and normal, what does it mean in costs? What kind of statistics we might use in order to, you know, repel any ungrounded, for example, arguments from the producer side to sustain the system. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will give maybe first the floor to Anja Riber here in the room, and then online Mia Bonnichsen can also react to all your very good questions.
Yeah, I can say it's very good questions you have, the two of you. I will just make clear that I'm an expert in poultry behavior and welfare, so not in the economics or in the climate impact. But if I can give my opinion, then I think we have to look at this in a broader perspective. So like what Mia just presented, there is an expectation of the consumers moving from beef to poultry, which is cheaper, even though if it's slower growing, because slower growing broilers are more expensive. They are less feed efficiency. That's the fact. But if we move from beef, which is more expensive, to the slower growing broilers, it's still it doesn't affect the economy of the consumer. And I hope you're talking about the economy of the farmers. I hope that the bill will not end up by the farmers, but by the consumers. And again, if we look at it at a broader perspective, it's a change of at least the farmers of broilers. It won't end up there, the bill, if we have this move towards broiler poultry meat away from beef. And the same in terms of the climate effect, because there is, if we look narrow on it again, yes, the slower growing hybrids, because they are less feed efficient, they will have a higher impact on the climate. But again, I think we need to look at this at a broader perspective. Do you want to add something, Mia? Yeah, maybe Mia is better at answering that question about how many will follow the initiative that Denmark has made. Do you know that?
Yeah.
We can't hear you.
What was the question? How many will follow the lead of Denmark? Well, I don't know that.
Okay, it's a rather new initiative. It was the press release was on the 23rd of June this year. So yeah, it's rather new.
Maybe Maya wanted to say also some words on the economic impact. Please, Maya.
Yeah, I'm very happy to answer that question. Also on the member states following, you know, as the speakers just said, yes, this is a very fresh initiative, so it's very hard to say at this stage, you know, how many would follow, but I can imagine just because in many member states, slower growing breeds are already pretty common. For example, the Netherlands, you know, there are member states that already are invested in this business. So it would make sense that, you know, they would also have incentive to follow. Just also because these member states are, you know, kind of traditionally very pro-animal welfare. So I think this will pick up speed. And on the economic side, so there is Peter van Hoorn, a researcher on poultry economics who has been working on this for years, has a lot of studies out there on this, and recently he did a comparison of the costs of how much more this would cost in different member states. So this differs between member states, of course, and there are different reasons for this. So first of all, for example, the cost of labor, the state of like how much is already done in a specific member state, and stuff like that. But so it differs, as I said, but it's between 15 to 18% of the rise of costs. And of course, this cannot be, the farmers cannot be bearing the brunt of the costs. And we very often say that, this is something that the EU must finance, must help with financing. This cannot be this cannot be financed by farmers themselves. Of course, they have to participate as well, but it's important for them to be informed already at this stage that changes are coming. And this is also why we're here to talk about this, right? So we all have to be in this together.
I just wanted to add that if you look at countries outside of EU, there are some countries that has a lot of experience with slower growing broilers. So Norway and Switzerland, for example, they are using slower growing broilers. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I always say if we support with public money such initiative, then we need, on the other hand, also transparency on the cost that is really needed. Here we speak about 15, between 80%, but
15 to 18.
Yeah, 15 to 18. Yeah, so it's not enormous, but if we then support that with public money, with taxpayers' money, we need, on the other hand, really also full transparency from the industry side. And I think, please take the floor, but please present yourself. I think I know who you are, but better you present yourself to be sure.
You think you know who I am. Well, now I will tell you. My name is Birte Steenberg, and I am the Secretary General of the European Poultry Meat Association, AVEC. And I really want to thank you for making this meeting today. It's always so important to discuss animal welfare. I have one little tiny complaint, though. Why don't you invite people from the sector to come and give a presentation too, so we can have a constructive dialogue, because we need dialogue about animal welfare. And I just want to give you some facts, and I'll be quick. The consumption of poultry meat will go up with 5% in the EU until 2030. That's what DG Agri predicts. If we go to slower growing breeds all over Europe, the CO2 emissions will go up with 28%. The feed consumption will go up with nearly 16%. The water consumption will go up with 16%. And the need of houses will go up with 25%. And we will never get the permission to build these houses because of environmental concerns. That will mean that we will go down in production in the EU from 113% of self-sufficiency to 63, which means that we will have to import those 5% extra we need to eat from other parts of the world, where the demands on animal welfare are not as high as they are in Europe. Furthermore, we have the Greenville study from the Wageningen University that has not been mentioned at all during the scientific presentations. There they mention that farm management is a very, very important factor for animal welfare. And we have that example from Denmark, because in the conventional production in Denmark for many, many years, the food pad lesions have been monitored, and they have been going down, 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 down. So we can manage very fine animal welfare in the conventional production. And the citizens, they turn a little bit different when they turn into consumers, because they really don't want to pay extra for more animal welfare. I wish they would. But we have a clear example, again, from Denmark. One Danish company, they went to slower growing breeds. They had to turn back because they couldn't sell it. So, and one very important factor, Denmark has not decided to go for slowing breeds. They have decided to talk about it. They have not decided to go for slower growing breeds. So please, it sounds like I am against animal welfare. I am not. I'm a veterinarian by education. I really want more animal welfare, and I want to make it in a dialogue with you. The President of the Commission yesterday launched a strategic dialogue on agriculture. Couldn't we please start having a strategic dialogue between everybody on animal welfare? Please. Thank you.
Thank you for this input. I mean, the conclusion we should take out of this is, of course, that we should also push for more plant-based diets. I mean, the solution is certainly not by eating more and more and more and more meat, and it's not good for the environment. You mentioned it. It's not good for human health, and of course, it's not good for animal welfare. When do we take the right conclusions out of what we are seeing? I give you the floor now.
Pardonnez-moi.
I apologize. Just to clarify things, a crucial point is the mirror clauses application, because even if we have good legislation, we will be invaded by what comes from Brazil and other countries, and where animal welfare is not the same as here, but because there is a real problem with the standard of living here in Europe. So we must absolutely, and in fact, last time I had put a question to the European Commissioner, who remained very evasive on mirror clauses. As long as they are not applied, that will be a problem.
Oui, je suis tout à fait d'accord. Caroline, tu voulais dire?
Caroline. So since we have a little time, I would like to make a comment on the ESA recommendation on a growth less than 50 grams a day. Indeed, we have recommendations from EFSA, but we have to have a great deal of work on the part of the European Commission, because, as I said yesterday during the debate, there are so many EFSA recommendations that have not been taken into account by the European Commission. We have to exert pressure on the Commission with regard the amendment of legislation on animal welfare, and that take into account scientific recommendations, which is not the case.
Oui, les premières conclusions.
Well, the first short-term conclusions is that at least we should respect the EFSA studies, and which are confirmed by the universities and by scientists in general. If we have high standards, they have to be implemented and respected. And if that is the case one day, we all know that we need an update on the rules and regulations. So we must exert pressure on the Commission, and our standards need to be respected by the imports as well. But there's a whole reflection that needs to take place on our eating habits.
French, but other remarks, Petras or Niels? Niels. No, it was Niels.
I can just say that for me it's very clear that a very important part of the solution to this to these problems is that we go for a more plant-based diet. I don't think we can say we need to eat more and more meat, and then in order to do that, not to destroy the climate, we need to breed animals so they grow so fast and efficient that they break bones. I mean, that's not tenable from any point of view. So obviously we need to have better animal welfare, slower growing broilers, but then combine it, of course, with eating less meat and more plants. And I think that the agricultural sector often says that, you know, we need to produce more and more, and that's why we need to do it more efficient. And it's not tenable. It's not ethical. So we need to go for a more plant-based diet, and that's an important part of the answer here, I think.
thank you for your support in that idea. And we have a lot of tools that we could implement there. It's starting by education. It could start also by tax policies that we push into the direction of more plant-based. And so public procurement that we could also then push for more plant-based diet. So it is not that we say that everybody has to be vegetarian or vegan tomorrow. It'd be nice, but it is already using less meat and animal products. I think that is one of the conclusions we definitely have to take here. Anja, you wanted to add something?
There are a lot of things I would love to say, but I think I heard in the comment from Avec that the consumer is not willing to pay, and I want to do a request to the European Commission here as well, because the previous Eurobarometer we see that consumers are willing to pay for more animal welfare. And I know there is a new Eurobarometer laying on the shelf, and I think it is important that we urge the Commission to publish that as soon as possible to also get more insight, accurate insight in what consumers really want, because I'm quite convinced they want more animal welfare, and I think we should, for the farmers, not only look into the costs, extra costs they make, but also into the environmental costs they cause. And I think we should balance it.
Yeah, we have to look at all the costs, at all the externalities, and really also, I can also completely agreeing on that. We need to have the last Eurobarometer results in order to see what the citizens really want. And of course, yes, you insisting to have the floor again. You may add something, please.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's going to be very interesting to see the Eurobarometer, but please let me ask you a question. Is that Eurobarometer based on what people say they're going to do or what they actually do? Because we need to base it on what they actually do. The people I represent, they are willing to produce much more different systems if they are sure that they can sell it. These people, they also have children who need school books. They need to make a profit on what they do every day. They need to earn money. And if we press them into a system where they will get out of business because nobody can afford to buy their products, then we are not having achieved anything. And please, let the thing that you remember I have said here today be, we need to talk. We can't sit in different silos and shout in echo chambers. And that's what we're doing at the moment. We need to talk and to find compromises. And we have really tried that through the animal welfare platform, but we are not really successful. So please, let's talk and let the science be the base of what we're going to do in the future. Thank you.
That is exactly what I wanted to say. Let's listen to the science. Let's listen to the suffering of the animals. Let's listen to the researchers of the universities, and let's listen to the citizens. I think the industry, of course, we have to listen also what is the real issues to make a transition for the industry. But I think there are a lot of levels where they are heard, and I think the industry, what they need is most of all clear ambitions, rules, objectives.
Excusez-moi, je rajouterais juste un mot. Quand même des citoyens qui seraient prêts à ne pas manger.
50% of the citizens would not eat animal products if they knew clearly what, animals have to endure. So labeling could mention something about what the animal must endure.
Spoke about the cost, but also transparency regarding how the animals were held on the breeding conditions. But I don't want to have the last word. I would like to give the floor to the experts that we have invited, and really thank you very much to make maybe some conclusions. Please go ahead.
I listened to what Avec is saying, and I'm thinking that you are cherry picking when, for example, you're saying that management, you can have higher welfare when you have good management, then you forget this about the 3 circles, that you have to pick different indicators from relevant areas of welfare, because you just look upon one thing. Here in this case it was foot-pad dermatitis. It doesn't solve the problems with hunger in the breeders, it doesn't solve the problems with leg disorders, etc. So of course management and housing conditions, things like that can have an effect, but there is no doubt that genetics is the one factor that means the most to the welfare of the animals.
Clear words that we have there. Mia Bonnichsen, do you want to add something if you're still there?
Well, I agree with the scientific here. The scientific evidence is very clear. The fast growth rate of the broilers comes with a large price on the welfare of the animals. And this cannot go on, and we cannot let the animal pay the price for the climate crisis. That's not acceptable.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I think it goes also, there's a lot of possibilities where animal welfare goes hand in hand by fighting climate crisis. Also, it's not always opposite. I got your message that sometimes in different situations you want to produce more with less. That is exactly the point with the intensive farming. That is the issue there. But in general, if you do more animal welfare, it's also good for fighting climate change. So I think the main conclusions that we, of course, can take here in the Animal Welfare Intergroup, it is high time we ban the farming of fast-growing broilers and made this crucial step towards a more just world for animals. So we believe in the power of commitments from democratic institutions, and we are hopeful to see the draft legislation including such provisions very, very soon. And I still have some hope. I must say it was a question also from Annika about the revision of the animal welfare legislation. I still try to push as much as pressure, and we as Animal Welfare Intergroup did, you know that, and I still hope that this legislation will come out, because apparently it's ready to come out, the revision of the legislation on animal welfare. So I don't think it's the moment for strategic or geopolitical or political reasons to not come out with this revision of this legislation. So we need to still put the maximum on pressure to get it, and with good provisions on animal welfare. So the next meeting of the Animal Welfare Intergroup will take place on Thursday, the 5th October. Philip Limbery, the CEO of Compassioning World Farming, will present his book, 60 hours left, and we might also have a representative of the European Commission to update us about the latest policy development for sustainable food system. I'm very looking forward to see you all there, and thank you very much for your support, and it's always good to see you. Being together makes us stronger to support all that we have to support right now regarding the lack of animal welfare legislation coming out. So let's continue to put pressure together. I think together we will succeed. So have a very nice day, take care, and thank you again to the excellent experts that we had today. Thank you.